downtown lamppost. During the lengthy quest for a publisher, some editorial reactions were astounding, even for those days. One assistant editor wrote, he said, "I found this story fascinating, but envision marketing problems because black people don't read books." Another wrote, "Something like this would only serve to stir up more racial hatred and possible violence." But when the book appeared in the spring of 1979, the publisher who had taken the book was already in Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and media largely ignored the book, though a Minneapolis Tribune reviewer chided me for resurrecting the incident and, quote, rubbing our noses in it all over again. During the months leading to publication, friends suggested I get an unlisted telephone number or prepare myself for prank calls and threats. Perhaps because the book was scarcely noticed by the public, none of this happened, though I did receive mailings from a man named Elroy Stock, a Twin City businessman whose pathetic views on race led him anonymously to send racist polemics through the mail to anyone working for racial harmony, persons of mixed race marriages, or Caucasians who adopted other race children. These mailings were laced with out-of-context biblical quotes and statements from pseudoscientists regarding the intellectual superiority of white Europeans. Elroy Stock's tract derided the notion of an American melting pot, resulting instead in the unwholesome mixing of races, which was in contrast to the will of God. Following slavery, he reasoned, if blacks had returned to Africa, European Americans wouldn't be dealing with soaring crime rates and welfare costs. Stock, a man of wealth, perpetuated his crusade for many years until unmasked by Twin Cities press investigations. His mailings persist today, though by court decree they are no longer anonymous. He seemed a rather timid, not at all frightening human being, though his views were and are. There were several other mailings sent to me from white supremacists proving the multiple inferiorities of the black race and justifying the lynchings of black men who had doubtless committed grave and insidious offenses. Pretty sure insidious wasn't one of their words, though. There was only one face-to-face incident. At a book fair in St. Paul, a man approached me and angrily demanded to know how many innocent white police officers blacks had killed. You've chosen a sympathetic view of one episode where 3 vicious criminals got what they deserved instead of reporting on the number of whites who get mugged or killed by black criminals every single day, he shouted. His face reddening, his voice rising, he was finally led away by an acquaintance. Otherwise, the book received little attention and sales were disappointing. And the book didn't impact revisionist history either. Future editions of the books I mentioned earlier didn't reference the lynching in their subsequent printings. 8 months after They Was Just Niggers appeared, the publisher went into Chapter 17 receivership, ending, for all intents and purposes, the life of this book. I managed one partial royalty payment of about $260 as the company folded, and with that I managed to get new tires for the 1968 Dodge I was driving. There wouldn't be film options, no manse with a pool, no fame, let alone fortune. An Illinois distributor picked up the original publisher's backlist and circulated the title for another year. In all, I may have gotten about $1,000, and I assumed the story of the lynchings was destined to remain ignored. But the book didn't exactly die after it disappeared from bookstore remainder bins. When politicians in Duluth wanted to build a new highway department station on the site of the long-abandoned Cook home, which had formerly served as a residence for the indigent, protests followed. It wouldn't be right, protesters argued, to build where 3 innocent men were buried in unmarked graves. See, while researching this book, I was told that the lynching victims, Isaac McGee, Elmer Jackson, and Elias Clayton, had been buried there in a potter's field. But at that point, an administrator at the Park Hill Cemetery, which was owned by a local Lutheran church, revealed that the bodies had always been in that cemetery, though the graves were never commemorated. In 1991, the committee raised funds, and in a solemn ceremony, markers were placed on the graves. Several months later, the Duluth branch of the NAACP was invited to Topeka, Kansas, where a man named Sonny Scroggins, a civil rights activist, had succeeded in getting that city to name a highway overpass the Elmer Jackson Bridge in honor of the lynch victim who was a Topeka native. I didn't attend, but a neighbor, former neighbor of mine in Duluth, and Marge Wilkins was her name, a longtime civil rights activist, she told me that within hours after the dedication, the bridge was defaced with racist graffiti. About 2 years later, a man named Harlan Quist called. He was on hiatus from publishing ventures in New York and Paris, where he had produced numerous critically acclaimed, very lavishly illustrated books for young readers. Included on the roster of luminaries he published were Robert Graves, Eugene Ionesco, Edward Gorey, Mark Van Doren, and a great many, mostly French, illustrators who subsequently attained international eminence. He wanted to reissue my book to aid in an effort to restore the North Shore Theater in downtown Duluth. He was residing in his hometown again, he said, to care for his aging mother, and was looking for something to do. He envisioned the North Shore as a small, intimate live theater where local and touring companies could stage new works, and where local poets and artists might read and show their latest creations. He said the North Shore would have the ambiance of a Paris salon and coffee bar, but he needed capital to sustain the operation. Well, with his record as a quality publisher, he coupled with no other offers to give the book a second incarnation, I signed a contract with Quist. He retitled the book Trial by Mob and released it at an inaugural bash at the North Shore in combination with a production of Lady Day at Emerson's Bar and Grill, which is a stage version of a jazz club performance by Billie Holiday. However, Quist's edition of the book experienced a shorter life than the original version. 3 months later, the company Quist engaged to print the book called me and asked if I knew where he was. He hadn't paid the printer. His phone had been disconnected, and mail was being returned with no forwarding address. Well, I didn't have a clue. I was told this printing made it into few bookstores outside of Duluth, and after Quist's surreptitious departure, leaving other creditors empty-handed, his nicely designed edition of Trial by Mob also disappeared. When he died a few years ago, I read an extensive obituary on him in the New York Times. The 2 printings of a book I once assumed might be of some consequence sold fewer than 3,000 copies, and I believed the story was all over, was done. But in 1994, an independent film company called. One of their screenwriters had been vacationed in Duluth and read the book in the city library. He wanted to craft a treatment and develop it as a cable television movie. Had anyone optioned the book for film, he wanted to know. Well, maybe there was life in the old book yet, so I signed a contract with payment to follow once a network deal was finalized. There was a minor problem, though. Demographics concerning made-for-television films mandated female protagonists. There were none in this book. But the producer said he could fix that. A month later, I received his treatment, which indeed included a strong female character not present in the book, but which would, he assured me, make a more positive impact on the suits at Time Warner or HBO. I wondered about that. The female character was a crusading journalist. But now in 1920, few women held positions of note on any newspapers. Female reporters were by and large consigned to society pages reporting on weddings or social events. With very few exceptions, they weren't on the front line. Certainly they weren't in Duluth. During the 2-year term of our agreement, there were numerous nibbles, according to this film company, but no takers. Shortly before the option expired, the producer assured me he would keep trying to sell the film until hell freezes over if necessary. Though not mentioned by major media, the fires must have been banked because the option expired without notice.